Ouch!
dear.
Oh, my poor husky.
Sorry.
Whistler, a word of advice.
Yes?
When your chicks hatch, let Speedy teach them how to fly.
Oh, I was going to anyway. You all right, young'un?
Suppose so.
Where are the weasels?
Still looking for us. But we'll be safe here.
Better keep our voices down, eh?
In that case, may I suggest that Whisper stay and help us tell the story? Get it?
Ha ha.
Oh, I thought it was rather good myself.
Come on, before they turn up again. Far from White Deer Park, Bold was finding his way.
Yeah, he arrived in the town in the early morning and laid low on waste ground. At first, he was very frightened. You've never heard the roar of the traffic, have you, Husky? Nor smelt the terrible fumes, nor felt the dirt clinging to your coat. Bold was miserable. But soon he was joined by the crow, who told him not to worry. Come night time, the people would disappear. The traffic would fade away to nothing, and it would be safe to go and forage.
One fine moonlit night, when the perfume of flowers was on the air, I was exploring some gardens on the outskirts of town. I picked some charred meat from the ground and jumped onto a table to eat it. But looking up,
She saw Bold, staring at her through the bars of the gate. Bold thought she was the most beautiful young vixen he had ever clapped eyes on. He just couldn't take his eyes off her.
But I was more interested in eating. When I'd finished, I jumped off the table and walked to the gate, throwing the poor maimed fox little more than a glance as I jumped over it. "I'm bold," he said. I looked at him. He didn't look very bold to me. I said nothing and went on my way.
Bold was very disappointed, but he picked up the chicken leg he'd found and went back to the wasteland. Crow had already arrived. He too had pickings from the night's foray. He started on the chicken leg Bold had brought and asked why his friend wasn't eating his offering. Wasn't it good enough? Bold shook his head very sadly and told the crow he was lonely. He missed the company of other foxes. The only other fox he had met had turned her nose up at him. Her nose? Crow croaked. Now he understood. He told Bold all he needed was a bit of meat on him and the young vixen would soon come round. He made Bold eat the rest of the chicken.
The following night, I went back to the garden. And again, the maimed fox came and stood outside the gate, looking at me soulfully through the bars. Suddenly, to my amazement, he began to dig. Distressed and desperate, he was trying to tunnel his way underneath. Curious, I walked up to him and spoke to him through the bars. "Why don't you just jump over?" I said. "I can't," he replied. "I can't run either." He was very touchy, but I felt sorry for him. It's hard for an old fox struggling to survive on his own. So I offered to be his legs. We could work as a team, I said.
Bold thought he was in seventh heaven. And you made a good team, didn't you, Whisper?
Yes, I took him to the canal where I knew there were a lot of rats. Bold stayed on the bank, while I swam, driving the rats towards him. They were so busy looking behind them, they didn't see Bold, crouched, ready to pounce. We got many good meals that way.
An excellent arrangement. Almost worthy of Farthing Wood.
Almost.
Well,
Ignore her, Whisper.
you usually do. Huh.
Anyway, the next night I was hunting alone down at the canal when I saw Bold limping up. We hunted for a while. Then I took him back. I had an earth in a churchyard. It was quiet there and safe. There were even mice. But as soon as we reached the wall that surrounded it, my heart sank. I hadn't thought it through. Your father simply couldn't jump over it. He was shamed. I could see that. So I pretended I didn't notice and started looking for another way in. I found some loose stones and started pulling at them. They toppled out, and soon there was a hole big enough for Bold to crawl through. As we lay in the warm earth, Bold and I began to talk. I sympathized with him. Life must be very hard for an old fox like you, I said. If you'd seen his face. Me? Old? He replied. This is my first season. I'm as young as you are. I was horrified. He looked so careworn and thin and draggled, and then there was his leg. I asked him what had happened to him, and then he told me about the park.
And about his famous father, the fox from Farthing Wood.
When he had finished, I said, I'm honoured to know you, Bold.
Bold stared at his reflection in the canal. He hardly knew himself. The young bold cub from White Deer Park had grown old before his time. With a sinking heart, he realized that Whisper had only taken him in because she pitied him.
Then, one day, 2 disasters happened.
Oh, talk about disasters.
Oh, shh. There's only one of them.
Hello?
Oh,
Hello? What are you doing here?
Avoiding you.
where's Measley?
Don't know. Don't care.
Oh, well, I suppose we must be grateful for small mercies.
Hello, Weasel. Mum was just saying how 2 disasters happened, and all at the same time.
Yes. First, Bold came back to find our hole in the wall had been repaired and he couldn't get through it. Secondly, a huge dog had come along and was now standing outside barking. Hearing the uproar, I came out of the earth. Bold had helped me. Now I must help him. I ran towards him. The dog barked more than ever. Side by side, Bold and I stood our ground, snarling at him. Suddenly the dog stopped barking. Why are you snarling? He asked.
Let me do the dog.
Oh, no.
Please.
Go on, Weasel. You do it if you like.
Too soft by half.
He said, I only want to be friends.
We gaped at the dog in astonishment.
I'm not surprised if he sounded anything like Weasel.
Well, he was a bit like Weasel, but...
Get on with the story.
Sorry. Then the dog said...
Oh, no.
I'm so lonely. Please play with me.
Oh, dear.
We had never heard anything like it. We were starting to smile when suddenly Crow turned up. He swooped down on the dog and well, the dog just raised a paw and biff! The crow fell dazed to the ground. Bold was very upset. That crow's my friend, he said, and you've killed him. The dog was as astonished as we had been a few moments before. A fox friendly with a crow? He bent and looked down at the poor stricken bird. And then he started wailing. He wailed and wailed.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Weasel. And then the crow's eyes fluttered. He was alive. In fact, every time the dog sighed, the crow stirred. He was breathing life into him. We urged him on. Sigh some more, we said. Keep talking. And the dog just kept on sighing and saying he was so sorry. And the crow kept on getting better, till soon he was standing on his feet, looking at us all in bewilderment. Then we introduced ourselves. Rollo, as the dog was called, asked if he could do anything to make it up to us. We said, you can remake our hole in the wall. And he did. He had a lot of fun doing it too. The cement was still wet and he got it everywhere. However, at last it was done and Bold could get back to the safety of our home. But Rollo didn't want to go home. He said he was lonely.
I'm so lonely.
And noticing how thin Bold was, he offered to share his food with us. Rollo had plenty of food. His master may have neglected him by leaving him alone, but he made sure he didn't starve. And neither did we. From that day on, we always had plenty to eat. Our strange foursome was very happy. But the autumn leaves were beginning to fall,
Nothing lasts forever.
and I was carrying Bold's cub. You, my dear husky. I didn't want you to be born in a town. You carried the blood of the farthing fox in your veins. You should be born in White Deer Park. So I asked Bold to lead us back there.
Bold had sworn never to go back to White Deer Park. He looked at Whisper, broken-hearted. Why? He asked.
For the sake of your son, I told him. Bold looked at me, and I saw a mist come over his eyes. He dropped his head. All right, he said, if that's what you want. So, for your sake, Husky, Bold began the long journey back to the park. Rollo was inconsolable. He wailed and he wailed and he wailed. He wanted to come with us. He wanted to help look after the cub. But of course, it wasn't possible. Your master will miss you, we told him. But he only said, no, he won't. Only see him when he brings my food out all day.
I'm so lonely. It's a dog's life.
He let us have one last meal before we went.
Crow knew how much it pained Bold to go back. He believed Whisper had only taken him in as a mate because of me and my so-called fame.
For Bold, with his useless leg, it was a hard road, and they made slow progress. Bold knew they had to get as far as they could before winter set in, but it was no good. One day he said to Whisper, I must rest. They holed up in an old earth. Crow, who'd been following their journey, tried to help. He brought titbits of food, adding to Whisper's contribution in the hope of strengthening Bold. But it wasn't enough. Bold needed real food. Crow went back to the town and sought out Rollo.
Hooray! He was very pleased to be of service. He dug up an old bone,
Beggars cannot be choosers.
and grasping it between his jaws, he started out after the crow.
Bold and I had gone on, but we weren't travelling for long before Bold collapsed. I started crying. I began to realize how selfish I'd been. Bold simply wasn't up to such a grueling journey. I tried to get him back onto his feet, just long enough to get him under cover, but he couldn't move. I nosed at him, trying to budge him, but it was hopeless. He collapsed right in the middle of an open meadow. I covered him up with leaves as best I could, then went to a hole nearby. I could see a man with 2 greyhounds. Any minute they'd find poor Bold. Bold had seen them too, and now he was trying desperately to get to some cover. He dragged himself along the ground. The leaves fell away from him, and suddenly the dogs saw him.
Oh,
They started towards him. They were getting closer and closer. Any minute they would be on him, and there was nothing I could do. I looked away. I heard Bold scream. Then suddenly I heard a different bark. Rollo, our old friend, was bounding towards the greyhounds. One of them had its jaws in Bold's back, but not for long. Rollo seized the dog by the scruff of its neck and held him dangling in the air. Bold fell to the ground, writhing in agony. And then the greyhound fell, its neck broken. The other greyhound retreated, and the man, coming to see, found a huge St. Bernard dog standing over the wounded body of a fox. Not daring to come any nearer, the man picked up his dead dog and, with the other at his heels, went quietly away. But Bold needed food. Crow asked Rollo to fetch the dead hare, and Bold, true to his nature, shared it with me. I told him, "I'm sorry I made you go back to the park. I knew you didn't want to." But he only replied that he would never have survived without the help of friends, and maybe the oath was right after all.
Meanwhile, back in the park. Weasel, don't cry. Measly's here, your own little Measly. Oh, Weasel, you missed me. How'd you make that out? I heard you down at the pond. I'm so lonely. How's that? I was being a dog. Oh. Shh. Sorry.
In White Deer Park, things had taken rather a nasty turn. Goaded by her mate, Lady Blue had come to see the Red Fox's cubs. But Vixen saw her and challenged her. The resulting fight left Lady Blue with a torn ear, while Vixen was badly cut. Now Fox blamed himself. He decided, and about time too, he decided that he had avoided the confrontation with Scarface for far too long. It was high time he lived up to his reputation. Some of us had begun to wonder.
Give it a rest, Al.
So, Fox, and here I must say, I become quite tearful. I really can't help it.
Stop it, Al. I'm getting wet.
It was me he wanted, so it was me he was going to get. I challenged Scarface to single combat, but first I made him agree if he killed me, his quarrel with Farthing Wood would come to an end. And if I killed him, well, the same applied.
Oh, it was so exciting. First they circled one another, then suddenly Scarface made a rush at Fox. But Fox dropped low and Scarface missed. But having missed, he turned quickly and got Fox by the scruff of his neck. Fox broke free.
Scarface had fur in his mouth.
And then? What happened then?
Speedy happened. To stop her chattering down in the earth and giving us all away, somebody had put a cone in her beak. Well, suddenly she starts coughing, so Whistler thumps her on the back, and this cone, it comes out of her beak faster than she could talk, and that's fast. And it hits Scarface on the head. Well, is he surprised?
Yes.
Well, he looks round to see what hit him,
And I went for his throat.
But Scarface got away. He turned and jumped on Fox. Oh, it was too...
Get on with it.
Too...
I was winded. I could see Scarface standing over me, teeth bared. Any minute, and he'd tear my throat out. I wriggled out from under him and got clear. Then I braced myself for the big attack.
Once more they circled one another.
Scarface launched himself at me. I felt pain. He had drawn the first blood. His side cheered.
Boo!
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 He'd got me on the shoulder. And now he was coming towards me. I backed off. I wasn't ready. Then I stumbled. Scarface made a rush at me and bit me in the neck.
Ouch!
But I replied quickly. Oh, yes, he wasn't expecting that. I put out a leg and I thrust him off. Then I went for him. I bit into his thigh and wouldn't let go. He wriggled and struggled and twisted round, but I held on, and eventually Scarface fell on his back. I leapt on top of him and got him by the throat. Then Well, I don't know. Something got to me. It was the oath. You know, someone shouted,
The warden's coming! The warden's coming!
The blue foxes were backing away, and Fox let go.
if only I'd... But the oath. I just couldn't do it. I'd lost the killer instinct, you see. I said, we all said,
I didn't.
I said he was a twit.
most of us said it was all right, that Scarface knew he was beaten and wouldn't bother us again. But, well, I was wrong.
Not for the first time.
Don't rub it in, eh, Al? As for you, Weasel, if you'd given Ada the right message in the first place, we wouldn't have been in that mess anyway. So...
Twit yourself, Weasel. Ow!
Well, that is true. I have often wondered whose side those weasels were on. If they had wanted rid of Scarface, they would have made sure they gave Ada the right message.
Oh, not again.
Not again.
We didn't do it on purpose.
No, we didn't.
In fact, if you ask me, dunking us in the pond was a miscarriage of justice.
Miscarriage of justice, yes.
By that, I mean it wasn't fair.
Unfair.
Who says?
I do.
Me as well, Weasel.
In fact, I insist on taking my case to a higher authority.
What authority can be higher than mine?
Stags!
She's got you there, Al. Well, Stag, what do you say? Once and for all, were the weasels guilty of deliberately misleading Ada, or were they not?
As we all know, Weasel is extremely silly. You should. It's your defense.
Ow!
Her silliness was, no doubt, the cause behind her failure. I do not believe, however, that there was any ill intention in what she and her accomplice did, nor do I believe that an act of sheer silliness merits the harsh punishment which was meted out to them. Did I phrase that correctly, Owl?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, good. Does that mean we can get our own back by dunking Owl and Whistler in the pond as well?
What good would that do? Whistler likes being dunked in water.
Perhaps an apology would satisfy.
We're
waiting.
Owl, Whistler,
We're sorry.
Don't worry, it was worth it just to hear you saying it.
Actually, the weasels weren't entirely to blame. I mean, if everyone had taken mates from the park creatures, as I did...
Excuse me, but your mate took you.
All the same, if everybody had, then we would probably have been accepted, and none of what happened would have happened, if you get my drift.
You need to take a mate.
I take a mate.
If you want to reach a state,
Reach a state
of perfect harmony.
Like Whistler and Speedy, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we live and learn, don't we?
I learned the hard way. I learned that I'd been very selfish. For as we journeyed on towards the park, I realized my mate was dying. It was my fault, and I knew it. But not a word of reproach passed Bold's lips, not one. Instead, he did his best to spare my feelings. He laughed and said so many animals had helped him since leaving the park, he might as well never have left. But when, passing through a wood on the last stages of our slow and painful journey, we met his friend Shadow, I knew he was only saying it for my sake. Shadow had never forgotten how Bold freed her from the trap. They had been good friends, and she had returned his help in kind. And when Bold said he was going back to White Deer Park, she was very distressed. "But," she said, "but you swore you'd never go back there. Why now?" And he answered, "My cub will see it." Then he thanked Shadow and said goodbye. And she knew. She knew it was his last goodbye. Crow still flew with us, and when I went off hunting, he stayed to keep Bold company. We were within sight of the park.
The bird was on the branch of a tree above the place where Bold was resting. Bold was very quiet, and the crow grew anxious. "What's wrong?" he called, and Bold said, "You know I can never go back in there." "Then why did you come?" asked the crow. "For Whisper's sake," Bold said, "and for my son. Now I've got them here, my job is over." They were close to the stream that runs through the park and out into the world. Bold staggered to his feet and dragged himself to its banks. There he slipped into the water and painfully made his way across to the other side. He was covering his scent. Once there, he sought out some bushes and crawled into them. He had completely disappeared. From his hiding place, he called out to the crow, "Don't give me away! Please, don't give me away!"
When I returned from hunting, Bold had gone. I put down the food I'd brought him and looked around. I saw the crow on a tree branch. "Where's Bold?" I asked. The crow only said, "Quack, quack, quack." "He was here a minute ago. He can't have gone far," I said, and I started looking for him. I picked up his scent and followed it to the stream. There I lost him. And I knew I'd lost him forever.
Mum, don't cry. You've still got me."
I know, and you're very precious to me. Promise you won't run off like your father. I know you want to see the world, and you will, but in time, Husky. Wait till you're old and wise enough to face its dangers. Please.
"I will, Mummy. I will. I promise."
The fight between the red fox and the blue resolved nothing. Many thought Fox should have finished Scarface off. Now Scarface was mending. Would he live to fight another day? Suspicion soured the air. Ranger and Charmer despaired. Then a female rabbit disappeared, carried off by Scarface. And the smaller creatures shivered. What could they do? They went to Fox, and he said,
"Don't look at me for advice. I'm not wise enough."
And it's true, too.
but someone, somewhere, had some idea what to do about Scarface. Someone we had none of us seen for a long, long time.
Ada!
Yes, Ada. She had stayed low, deep in a hole in the ground, nursing her severed tail for a long, long time.
She wasn't half the snake she used to be.
She had not eaten, had not hunted in all that time, and her venom was at its peak.
"Mum, can I cuddle up to you? I'm scared."
Scarface was no longer hungry, but he was thirsty, and he limped down to the stream. Looking round, he saw no one, so he thought it safe to drink. But there was someone who was almost invisible and deathly silent. Coiled in a willow herb, Ada lay watching. She'd emerged from her hiding place long since when Scarface grew tired of waiting and had slithered off to hide where he could not find her. There, she bided her time. Had that time come? Scarface drank. Ada slipped into the water, swimming nearer. As if warned by instinct, Scarface looked up again, and Ada sank from sight, a weed among many weeds. Stunned by his defeat, Scarface was not himself. He banished the sense of dread that had come over him and bent his head to the stream. Ada swam nearer. Thirst quenched, Scarface raised his head again. The late autumn sun was warm on his back. His feet were dusty in the water. Refreshing. He put in one foot, then another. Then he started swimming. Ada slipped behind him, floating ever faster downstream. When she came level, she whipped round and bit his leg. Scarface screamed and turned, but Ada had sunk without trace. Scarface swam to the bank and hauled himself up to inspect his leg. There he clearly saw the fang marks of a snake, and at once he knew who had done this to him. Looking down into the water, he saw Ada undulating toward him. "You killed me," he said, and she said,
I hope so.
A spasm overtook the blue fox. He began to tremble, and by the time his mate came looking for him, he was stretched out on the grass, cold. She was heartbroken.
Yeah, I guess she loved the old bully.
She was the only one that did. We all threw a party. Singing, dancing, hair thumped the ground for all he was worth. Toad did a jig, the squirrels threw a nut party, cracking nuts like they was jokes. Oh, Scarface, Foxy, dead and gone. You never see him more.
He used to have an ugly blue face and a mate who was silly a rude boy.
Why do bees hum?
I don't know. Why do bees hum?
'Cause they don't know the words.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Ranger didn't dance. He loved his father in spite of his shortcomings.
Yeah, and Bold loved me in spite of mine. Unable to find her mate, Whisper entered the park and came looking for us. We were so happy to see you, Whisper. But when you told us Bold was dying, somewhere close by where you couldn't find him, we ran to look for him. Poor Whisper couldn't bear to come. She stayed in the park.
When Crow saw Fox and Vixen coming, he knew at once who they were. He flew over their heads, cawing to lead them to where Bold lay.
When he heard us coming, Bold raised his head and tried to see, but everything was hazy. I told him it was his mother and father come to see him, that Whispered found us and we were looking forward to his cub, and then I...
Fox asked Bold to forgive him for being hard on him and told him how proud he was of him and how he was the bravest fox he had ever met. Yes. Yes. And then Bold died.
Charmer and Ranger arrived too late. Ranger and I looked at one another. We had both lost someone very dear to us. I looked at Charmer. Her eyes pleaded. I thought, well, maybe she's right. Maybe the union between Ranger and Charmer would put an end to the enmity between the two tribes. It was a new beginning for all of us. So I said yes. She could have him as her mate.
Hooray!
Soon, we were to see Bold's son. You, Husky. Whisper became one of us, and peace reigned. Of course, when I say peace,
Everything is relative, my dear fox.
Well, Husky, what do you think about White Deer Park now?
I want to know the end of the story. Does everyone live happily ever after?
that, my old son, is up to you.
The sun's coming up, and I'm tired now. I think I'll sleep on it. Maybe I'll dream the ending.